the same year that they have a kneeling cop murder a guy in the United States, and we have a riot over it. In France, they have 6 to 9 African refugees and French natives who've been living there for 3 or 4 generations, murdered by the same system. And nobody's talking about it in France. That's a problem. They're just saying the United States is just like, I mean, and I think at the end of the day, it's more about the cops in general, but it's just like, yeah, France doesn't seem to care. Like, but what I love is that now you have to wear a mask in France, because last year it was like, you can't wear burqa.
Yeah.
You're dressed like a Muslim, you're in trouble. It's like, you know what, take that, France. Why don't you all wear one for a week, and then you see how you feel.
Yeah,
love you, France.
But I have a question, right? Because I thought that like racism is like only an American problem, the only one, local problem.
Well, racism was invented by the word racism was a Trotsky term. Like racism, Trotsky said that the Slavs who were too Slavophile, that believed in this sort of pan-Slavism, were a danger, and that they didn't understand that nationalism was the enemy of international socialism, and that we want to work towards humanitarianism at all levels. So these people that are stuck in the mud about their nationalism, they're sort of, I think he called it racism. No, that's again, he went to Mexico after the Soviets kicked him out. But that's the thing, and you have to look also, was Engels and Marx, and especially Trotsky, was Trotsky racist? Yes. Like, Trotsky would say that Stalin wasn't decent to run the country because he was part Asian. So, I mean, of all the things wrong with... Stalin was beaten in a bag by his father for, like, as a dog. Like, they used to beat Stalin, and he had webbed toes, and he had, syphilis. There's a lot of things to hate about Stalin other than his race. So Trotsky, like, of all things, to pick that. Like, it shows that racism was a big problem in the Soviet Union because it was such a big thing. So the Americanism of the racism is a false precept, is a false presupposition. Racism didn't exist the same way 130 years ago. If you look at America in 18... Hey, look, more fireworks. Pretty rad. Okay, 100... There they go. There they go. God bless America. Cool. So 130 years ago, Massachusetts controlled Delaware. They're governors. But it said as far west as you can go, you can control territories. So if you can control Minnesota, as long as the French aren't there. And the French were there, and there were Scandinavians there. So they ended up getting into fights with people later on because of not race, because the Indians and the French were already mating. And the Chinese had already come, and they'd already created people. And the Moors had already been bringing people over, and the Indians owned slaves. And the slave laws were that you couldn't enslave the children, and you had to take care of somebody that was a slave when they were old. So they had all these kinds of, like, take care of people rules. And so then they've really changed the language of it. Like, you have to understand the Americas in the 1,000 years ago was a confederacy of Indians. And the Indian Confederation, the Arawak Confederation, the Five Nations Confederation, that became the ideal for the American Confederacy. And when you go to, like, Louisiana, so you had the United States was like 12 states. Then you have this big chunk, which is New France, Nouvelle France. And then you have the West, and the West Coast was Spain, right? Spain got French territory because France could never control it, and there was Vikings and there was Indians living in there, and eventually America kind of consumed these other nations. So racism isn't really racism, it's nationalism, and it's trying to war against. It's like, well, we're really all the same because we're this way, and you're all different because of this other thing. Racism at that time, Louisiana had black governors, right? We had blacks that signed the Declaration of Independence that have, like, their faces have been whitened. Thomas Jefferson, Hamilton at least. I think everyone's seen the Hamilton musical. If you haven't, it's on Netflix. Black people were very equal at a certain point. And then we ended up in this position where slavery happened, probably because there were a number of really powerful black families in the United States in the 1600s. And it checks out if you look at Brazil, you look at Argentina, you look at all these places. Black families were powerful because you'd have slaves that married into the one guy who owned this plantation in the middle of nowhere. He married one of his slaves, and he had kids, and he cared about his kid. It's a natural progression. So the President Fernandez or Jose Jose Fernandez, I forget, the president of Paraguay in the 1700s. Jose Paraguay president Jose. Original. I have to look it up. It'll take forever. But
right.
yeah, so Paraguay, they had a black president, and he made everyone marry each other in the 1800s. It was like you had to be mixed race by law. Like if you married someone, they had to be a native, they had to be a Spaniard, they had to be African, because they were like, we got to get rid of racism. So racism is a really kind of new thing. And like at the end of the day, you can prove this. Like, what is sexism modeled on? What is racism modeled on? So it's this idea that there is a social class that's higher than the other. So it's classism. So
right.
Classism always will outdate and will always permeate and will always supersede racism. Because at the end of the day, like, I would rather hang out with a good person who's a race I hate, quote unquote, than a bad person of the same race. Like if you have a rich black person, then the KKK is probably going to want to hang out with them more than a really like a heroin addicted, child molesting white person. So like morals count. Like at the end of the day, like this is a far-sighted vision spectrum for even the worst of the Americans. Even like the KKK are pretty bad. There's some pretty bad, versions of BLM too. Like there are racist everything. But like, I mean, what's weird is I just saw the KKK want to be racially inclusive. Did you see that?
No. When did that happen?
Dude, let me send you that one I can find. Racially inclusive KKK. And this has happened a while ago, actually. I think it was 2014 that they started saying it. But now they're like, dude, we're right here. We're a race-based organization that want to protect Black Lives Matter because we want white lives and Black Lives Matter together. And everyone's like, what's going on? But they had the NAACP at the KKK meeting in Montana. And the NAACP were like, all right, these guys are legit. And you're like, no, they're not. They're the KKK. What the heck are you talking about? But they've set up this idea that like we want to encourage our chapter to be more racially inclusive, and we want the broader KKK to not be considered a singular entity, but a number of small organizations that surround the concept of breaking free from the New World Order, and that respect the differences, and that the rainbow should be the KKK's rainbow too. And you're just, I mean, like, dude, I mean, did you see the picture of the black guy with the Confederate flag fighting the white guy with the Black Lives Matter flag? Because it's always like the matrix is broken. Like there's no in America, especially America is just this loud fever dream scream. It's just like, oh, like all the time. So I wouldn't say racism is our real problem, but people are hateful.
Yeah,
Right,
but the point what I was making, now it's my turn, I guess, to reply. Thanks, Andreas, for this goddamn huge response.
I feel like Robin Williams. I'm sorry.
But like because of this American superpower, it just brought this concept. Because like, let's say I've been hanging out with these guys like in an international community, and they've been talking like, racism, like all countries are racist. There is no racism. And they didn't want to admit that there's like certain degrees, right? And that's what got me pissed off. Like Russia is racist, just like British, and some other countries. Russia's
incredibly nationalistic. Russia's a pan-Slavic state that believes they're supreme and they speak the Slavic language perfectly. But like China says no black people in McDonald's. That's a little more racist.
Yeah, that's right. And we didn't colonize anybody. We didn't colonize Zimbabwe.
Well, the Russians have been a lot of places, though. I mean, like, wouldn't you say Croatia and the West? I would say that the West was pretty Russified, and the familial. They didn't have colonies the same way. But even in Hawaii, there's like Russian, bases and things in the 1800s. But yeah, Russia. What's the reason? Just because you guys had a lot of land? You think you didn't have?
Yeah, I mean, like, we just expand our territory to the east. That's the reason, we didn't have the access to the sea. So we just like, all right, whatever, we're going to go to Siberia.